our second live webinar, which will be presented by Carol Lefebvre. Well, we are about to start with our webinar, 10 things you may not know about the Cochrane Library, presented by Carol Lefebvre. Before I give the word over to Carol, I'd like to say a few words about our presenter, even though I'm sure that a lot of you know her already and know her work as well. Carol Lefebvre is an independent information consultant and focuses on teaching and consultancy in information retrieval for evidence synthesis, such as systematic reviews and a lot more. From 1992 to 2012, Carol was the Senior Information Specialist at the UK Cochrane Centre. She is also co-owner of the Cochrane Information Retrieval Methods Group, serves on the Cochrane Methods Executive, and is lead author on the searching chapter of the Cochrane Handbook. As you can see, we have an outstanding specialist of the Cochrane Library with us today. And I'm delighted Carol is our presenter and shares her profound knowledge about the Cochrane Library with us. Like the rest of you, I'm looking forward to hearing about the 10 things we may not yet know about the Cochrane Library. Carol, thank you so much for being here with us today. Your contribution and time are highly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Desiree, for that introduction. And thank you very much to EAHIL for inviting me to present this webinar, and to Maria Garcia Puente and to all her colleagues on the EAHIL online CPD pilot program who have worked to get this webinar off the ground as part of a series of webinars that are being offered by EAHIL. I should like to start with a declaration of interest. As Desiree says, some of you may know me, some of you may have come across my name, and for those of you who have, you possibly associate me with Cochrane in some way. And that is, of course, very reasonable that you should do so. I'm a founder member of Cochrane and have worked there since 1992. I'm currently still and was a founder co-convener of the Cochrane Information Retrieval Methods Group. I'm currently a member of the Cochrane Methods Executive, and I am the lead author on the searching chapter of the Cochrane Handbook, which I think also many of you will be familiar with. But I think it's also important that you should understand that I am not any longer employed within Cochrane. I am independent, as Desiree said in the introduction, and have been since June 2012, nor am I employed by Wiley, the publisher of the Cochrane Library. I have no particular association with Wiley in that sense. So what you will be hearing today is an independent view and an independent voice. I should like to start by getting a feel. We've got now over 130 participants on board. I'd like to get a feel for your level of experience of using the Cochrane Library. So what I'd like you to do, and some of you are doing this already, thank you. Have you ever used the Cochrane Library? So you should click yes or no in the pop-up poll box. And quickly doing a bit of mental arithmetic, you've nearly all voted now. And with the current figures, we have 111 of you who have used the Cochrane Library and only 6 of you who have not. So that's very encouraging, but I would like to particularly welcome the 6 of you who have not used the Cochrane Library but have nonetheless decided to join today's seminar. And I hope that after today you will be encouraged to use the Cochrane Library and that you will understand that there is also much free content on the Cochrane Library, even if your organisation does not have a subscription. So thank you very much for that. It would now be interesting to gauge your experience a little more closely to find out how often you use the Cochrane Library. And I should like you to select the number that matches your experience in the pop-up poll box. So if you use it about once a week, at least once a week, please select 1. If it's only about once a month, please select 2. If it's less frequently than once a month, please select 3. And then I imagine there'll be 6 of you who select 4. Okay, so the majority, or at least the highest polling figure is at least once a month. There are 51 of you who use it at least once a month. There are 36 of you who use it less frequently than once a month, and there are 29 of you who use it at least once a week. So doing a quick bit of mental arithmetic, that's 80 of you that use it at least once a month. So that's very encouraging. Thank you very much for participating in that poll. What I thought I would talk about today is 10 things that you may not know about the Cochrane Library. Nearly all of you use the Cochrane Library, and even those of you that don't will possibly have heard about it even before today's announcement of the webinar. But the first thing I wanted to point out is that the Cochrane Library does not consist only of systematic reviews of the effectiveness of interventions. This is what we are best known for, systematic reviews of the effectiveness of interventions, but you'll see that the Cochrane Library is a suite of databases, or has until now been a suite of databases. This will change at the end of March 2017, and from the end of March 2017 we will be launching what will be called the Enhanced Cochrane Library, and at that point the Cochrane Library will consist of the Cochrane database of systematic reviews, the first element on this slide, the Cochrane Central Register of Controlled Trials, and a new element called Cochrane Clinical Answers. But up until now, the Cochrane Library has consisted of all these different areas that you see listed on the slides. That is to say, the DARE, Database of Abstracts of Reviews of Effects, and I'll mention in a moment what's going to happen about DARE, the Cochrane Methodology Register, which will cease to be available through the Cochrane Library in March, but it will be available through the Cochrane website. And there's also the Health Technology Assessment Database, and there's the NHS Economic Evaluation Database. Again, I'll mention what's going to happen to that. So up until March 2017, and for many years now, Cochrane has been a suite of databases, not only reviews of effectiveness of interventions. So just to be clear, what will happen to these other databases after the end of March? DARE, as you know, probably has been put together by the Centre for Reviews and Dissemination at the University of York for many years. And there you have a quote from their website, which gives reassurance that DARE and NHS EAD archives will be secure on the CRD website until at least 2021. So even though these are coming off the Cochrane Library, you will still have good access to them. Even within the Cochrane database of systematic reviews, not all of the reviews are reviews of the effectiveness of interventions. We have, for example, diagnostic test accuracy reviews, and I have 2 fairly recent examples here for you. We have overviews of reviews, and as the name suggests, this is where you take systematic reviews of effectiveness or of other aspects and you compile them into one single overview. So the first one, for example, conservative interventions for urinary incontinence in women. What we've done here is pulled together all of the systematic reviews of urinary incontinence in women and pull them together into a single overview of reviews. We have one exemplar review that's a prognosis review, and it is still under discussion in Cochrane as to how we develop in the field of prognosis reviews. We have a number of editorials. These tend to be drafted either by the editorial unit staff or by other senior members of Cochrane. These aren't the most recent examples, but I've chosen these examples because I think they show important areas of discussion within Cochrane. The first one, you'll know, many of you who know about Cochrane, that Cochrane reviews pride themselves on being kept up to date. Increasingly, we're realizing within Cochrane that not only is that a very difficult goal to achieve, it might also sometimes be futile. And we're beginning to address that within Cochrane and how to take that on in a sensible and pragmatic way. So this is an editorial by colleagues from the Airways group, the Cochrane Airways group, entitled "This Cochrane Review is Closed. Deciding what constitutes enough research and where next for pulmonary rehabilitation in COPD." So that, I think, is an interesting example of policy discussions within Cochrane. And the second one, I'll talk more in a moment about the importance of regulatory agency information, but this is an important editorial about the role that regulatory agencies hold in their data in improving Cochrane reviews. The second thing that you might not know about the Cochrane Library is that Cochrane reviews are not based only on trial results published in journals. Of course, the majority of Cochrane reviews draw the majority of their data from the results of published studies. However, increasingly, we are including results of unpublished studies, and services such as clinicaltrials.gov, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with from the National Institutes of Health in the United States, services such as that are increasingly holding results of unpublished studies. And this is becoming more and more prevalent within Cochrane reviews. But also, we are looking at clinical study reports. This may be an area that you're less familiar with, but these are the detailed reports submitted by pharmaceutical industry to the regulatory agencies, such as the European Medicines Agency or the FDA in the United States, to support licensing applications. And these are very, very detailed reports running to tens of thousands of pages often, but these include the raw data that the pharmaceutical industry submits in support of its application. There is one Cochrane review, which I'm drawing your attention to here. You have the citation at the bottom of the slide. This is a Cochrane review of Tamiflu and Relenza, and this is based solely on clinical study reports produced by the manufacturers GlaxoSmithKline and Roche. So this review is not based on any published data from journal articles. It's not based on study records from trials registers. And this will have major implications for librarians and information specialists who support the development of systematic reviews. We do already recognize that we need to search trials registers, and I think people are becoming more aware of the need to search regulatory agency sources. And just to say that within Cochrane, we have a project on this at the moment. Sorry, before I talk about that project, I'll just very briefly give you an overview of the results of that review. It was the 2014 update that was based solely on the full internal reports. There were 20 Tamiflu and 26 Relenza trials with over 24,000 participants. And the results showed a duration of symptoms a shortening of the duration of symptoms by only approximately half a day. There was little evidence with regard to the reduction in hospital admission or the risk of developing confirmed pneumonia, and there was insufficient evidence regarding preventing person-to-person spread of influenza. So despite these very, very minimal findings, in the UK, we stockpiled the drug and it cost us, as in UK taxpayers, £500 million. And I know many other countries also stockpiled this drug based on the more favourable findings that had previously been reported. So if you want to follow this debate, it's a very interesting debate for all kinds of reasons, but if you wish to follow this debate, I've put some links on the slides here. There's a Cochrane editorial that was published at the same time that the review was updated. There's a Cochrane BMJ press release that accompanied the editorial, and an article in The Guardian by Ben Goldacre, who many of you will know, and also a report in the BMJ by their editor, Fiona Godley. And Peter Doshi and Tom Jefferson, who are two of the lead authors, wrote in the New York Times a couple of years earlier about this issue. So I'd mentioned that we're involved in a project in Cochrane at the moment to develop what we're calling interim guidance on the inclusion of clinical study reports and other regulatory documents in Cochrane reviews. And the objective is to draft guidance to help Cochrane authors decide whether to include data from clinical study reports and other regulatory documents in a Cochrane review, either together with or instead of data from published trials and or trials registers. So this is not how to do it. We're at the very, very early stages. We're just addressing the issues of whether this should be done for a specific review. The Cochrane review to which I've referred, the Tom Jefferson, Relenza and Tamiflu review, is the only Cochrane review currently based solely on clinical study reports. And there aren't that many outside in the rest of the world beyond Cochrane. So I'll not go through these slides now, but if you wish to follow up on these later, I've given you the methods of the study there. And just to say that the project is funded in part by a Cochrane Methods Innovation Fund award. The third thing you may not know about the Cochrane Library is that the Cochrane database of systematic reviews, which is probably the key element of the Cochrane Library, the one probably most of you are familiar with, it does have an impact factor. And the reason that I raise this is that sometimes clinicians and researchers say, well, I'm going to do a systematic review, but I'm not going to do a Cochrane review. I'm not going to publish with Cochrane because within my department, it's considered really important that we have publications in journals which have an impact factor. It's very important for our institution and so on and so forth, and it's very important for my personal career as an academic. So the important thing to remember is that the Cochrane database of systematic reviews is a journal. It's probably one of the very first electronic journals published in the early 1990s. And it's part of the Cochrane Library. The Cochrane Library, the suite of reviews, does not have an impact factor, but the Cochrane database of systematic reviews, the electronic journal within the Cochrane Library, does have an impact factor. And just to remind you that the impact factor is calculated annually based on the number of citations in a given year, for example, in 2005, to reviews published in the 2 years previous. So, for example, in 2013 and 2014, divided by the number of reviews published in 2013, 2014. And currently, our latest impact factor, which is for 2015, is 6.103, which is a very healthy impact factor in its category. And you can see that the number of citable items published in the Cochrane Library, the blue line, has been growing steadily over time here. But more importantly, the number of cites received to these Cochrane reviews is growing much more steeply than the number of citable items. So that's something that we're very pleased about in Cochrane. The fourth thing you may not know about the Cochrane Library is that Cochrane is working towards open access to all new and updated Cochrane reviews by 2020. We've had an open access policy for some years now, and on the 1st of February 2013, open access options were introduced for CDSR, where authors could choose one of two options for publishing their articles. Gold open access meant immediate open access upon payment of an article publication charge fee. or green open access meant publication via the so-called standard model with free access to the full article 12 months after publication. The one thing I would like to say is that this does not mean that you should stop subscribing, because as you will realise, this only refers to new and updated Cochrane reviews. And if you want more information about that, you have a link there on your screen. Our future plans for extending open access were announced a year or so ago now, and what you will see is from this quote, again more details from the link at the bottom of the slide, we're working towards the goal of achieving universal open access to new and updated Cochrane reviews by the end of our current strategic plan, which is 2020. And so that will mean that this will mean open access immediately upon publication for both new and updated reviews. So for those of you who do not have a subscription to the Cochrane Library at your place of work, please do remember that a lot of the material in the Cochrane Library is open access and has indeed been so for many years. But of course, for those people who have a subscription, there is further enhanced access. There is also an iPad edition of the Cochrane Library. When I teach about the Cochrane Library, I often find that people aren't aware of this, but the iPad edition gives the latest up-to-date evidence from the Cochrane Library. This is in a convenient and easy to navigate iPad format. The reviews are abridged. Monthly issues feature Cochrane systematic reviews selected by our editor-in-chief, Dr. David Tovey. And the reviews are enriched with multimedia content, including podcasts, videos, and slide decks. And again, at the bottom of the slide, you have the link that takes you to more information about our iPads. There are also podcast versions of Cochrane reviews. These are audio summaries of selected reviews. We've been doing this since the beginning of 2008. And again, you have a link on your slides there for further details. These podcasts are generally developed by one of the authors of the Cochrane Review, and they're very accessible from the point of view of understanding that they're written not for an audience who is particularly expert in the clinical field, but for people who are if you like, well-educated level of audience, so not somebody with an expertise in that clinical specialty. Again, you may not know that Cochrane does have a point of care tool. I think it's probably fair to say that Cochrane was a little late coming to the market with a point of care tool. By point of care tool, I mean similar to UpToDate or Dynamed, for example. And our point of care tool is called Cochrane Clinical Answers. These are readable, digestible, clinically focused entry points to rigorous research from Cochrane systematic reviews. They're designed to be actionable, that is for use at the bedside and to inform decision making at the point of care. They contain a clinical question, a short answer, and then an opportunity to drill down to the evidence from relevant Cochrane reviews. The evidence is displayed in a user-friendly format. It mixes narrative, numbers, graphics, and so on. The target audience is healthcare practitioners and professionals and other informed healthcare decision makers. It's been developed by Cochrane Innovations Limited in partnership with Wiley, the publisher of the Cochrane Library. And as I mentioned earlier, the Cochrane Clinical Answers product will soon be included within the Cochrane Library. So for those of you who have subscriptions to the Cochrane Library, you'll see from the end of March this year this enhanced Cochrane Library that I spoke about earlier, which includes Cochrane Clinical Answers. And I understand from Wiley, our publisher, that anybody who is currently inquiring about a subscription to Cochrane Clinical Answers, because it used to be a separate subscription product, but anybody who inquires now about Cochrane Clinical Answers is in fact being offered Cochrane Clinical Answers free of charge pending its release under the Cochrane Library subscription. So if you want an early sight of that, then please contact the Wiley link through the link at the bottom of the slide. You may not be aware that you can follow Cochrane, both Cochrane as an organisation and the Cochrane Library on social media and using RSS feeds. Social media, you can follow Cochrane on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Google+, YouTube and LinkedIn. And also, with respect to RSS feeds, you can subscribe to RSS feeds to hear about editorials, special collections, and highlights of new and updated Cochrane reviews. And you can visit Cochrane Clinical Answers to subscribe to RSS feeds on new Cochrane Clinical Answer topics. Also, Cochrane as an organisation, the Cochrane Collaboration website, also offers various RSS feeds such as podcasts, workshops and news items. Another thing you may not know about the Cochrane Library and about Cochrane is that we produce journal club packages based on Cochrane reviews. Recently, I spent 3 weeks teaching across Australia, and one of the things that I found that they were very interested in was these journal clubs, which one can describe as journal club on a plate, for want of a better way of putting it. Basically, what we've done here is pulled together. We now have currently 62 issues. When I checked the other day to compile these slides, we have 62 sets of journal club material ready to go. And what they consist of is relevant background information and related resources based on a recent or updated Cochrane review. There'll be podcasts by the lead author explaining the key points, discussion questions to explore methods and findings, downloadable PowerPoint slides with the key figures and tables, plus what we call free-to-all PDF of the review. That means that irrespective of where you're based, you would have free access to the full PDF of the review, even if you did not have a subscription to the Cochrane Library. And the way we choose which reviews will feature as part of our journal club suite is we choose a review of special interest, such as a review that will change practice or employs a new statistical method. And as I say, we currently have 62. So for those of you who work in environments where you know that your clinicians and researchers do run journal clubs, you might want to draw this to their attention. And the final thing that I wanted to mention, there are now rules or standards for the conduct and reporting of Cochrane reviews. Cochrane has been going for a very long time now. We started Cochrane, as I said, in 1992. And for those of you who remember Dave Sackett, who started the Centre for Evidence Medicine in Oxford in the UK in the early to mid-90s, he described Cochrane as being like an aeroplane that is still being built after it has taken off. And I think that was really a very fair description, one could say criticism, of Cochrane. We launched in October 1992, and really we were making it up as we went along, it has to be said. And because it was very much a volunteer effort and a bottom-up organisation, we couldn't be too prescriptive about how Cochrane reviews should be prepared, because people were doing these reviews free of charge in their own time, out of sheer enthusiasm and goodwill. However, we recognised over time that in order to maintain the standards and in order to ensure that the Cochrane reviews really are of the high quality that people thus far have thought they are, we really do need to have standards to which people must adhere. And so for many, many years now, we've had the Cochrane Handbook, which has been the Cochrane Bible. And I just want to remind you about the Cochrane Handbook first, before I move on to the new standards. The most relevant part of the Cochrane Handbook from your perspective as information specialists and librarians will be the Searching for Studies chapter. Interest declared, as I said already, that I'm the lead co-author on that section. But chapter 6, Searching for Studies, it lists sources including databases, trials, registers and so on, provides search hints and tips. It has the latest version of the RCT filters for Medline, and it's useful when supporting systematic reviews, but of course it's totally essential when librarians are supporting Cochrane reviews. It's currently under revision. The major revision is underway. We already have a first draft of our chapter, and we're hoping for publication later this year. And this is the URL where you will find the handbook, and that's the citation for the chapter. But as I've said, we have also now, over the last couple of years, introduced Cochrane standards. Last few years, I should say, where they were updated last year, first published in 2011. And they are called MECIR, M-E-C-I-R, which stands for Methodological Expectations in Cochrane Intervention Reviews. We called them expectations because when we set out on this, we were very sensitive about the idea, as I said earlier, about turning around to all of our volunteer authors and saying, this is what you must do. But in fact, the standards have been well received, and we do now openly call them standards. So these are the Cochrane standards, and they are at different levels. There are mandatory standards, there are standards which are only highly desirable but not mandatory, and then there are also elements that we classify as good practice. So we now have standards with regard to the conduct of reviews, with regard to the reporting of reviews, with regard to the conduct and reporting of protocols, and with regard to the updating of reviews. And you have the URL at the bottom of your slides there to find more information about the standards and to find the latest version of the standards themselves. What I've included on the next slides are only the standards that relate to searching, and from within that section, only the standards that are mandatory. So for those of you who are ever asked to help a Cochrane review author by doing searches, designing and conducting searches, running searches, providing records and so on, if you are ever asked to do that, these standards are those who must comply. These are the databases, for example, which must be searched for a Cochrane review. These are the minimum databases. That's the Cochrane Review Group Specialized Register, either internally or via Central, the Cochrane Central Register of Controlled Trials, which I mentioned on the very first slide as part of the suite of databases within the Cochrane Library. So you must search Central, you must search Medline, for example, via PubMed or via another service provider, and you must search Embase, but only if it is available to either the review group or the review author. So we don't insist on Embase if neither the review author nor the editorial team of the review group has an Embase subscription. If the review has eligibility criteria around adverse effects, economic issues, or qualitative research, then it's necessary to undertake searches to address these. It's now mandatory to search both clinicaltrials.gov and the WHO International Clinical Trials Registry portal, the ICTRP. It's mandatory to check the reference lists and included studies and any relevant systematic reviews. We specify that the search strategies have to be informed using PICO. We spend a lot of time and effort getting the wording of this right because we don't want people to be forced into the PICO model where the PICO model doesn't fit. So you inform the strategy using the appropriate elements of PICO, because again, we're not trying to suggest that it would be appropriate to use all elements of PICO in your final search strategy. and you must maximize sensitivity. It's obligatory to use controlled vocabulary in free text terms, and we don't encourage restrictions on publication format, for example, the removal of letters or editorials. But if that is done, we insist that you justify your restriction. Documenting the search process, it's mandatory that the search process is documented in enough detail to ensure that it can be reported, and it's mandatory that the searches are run or rerun within 12 months before publication. Cochrane reviews typically take 2 years to produce. I think our average is currently 2 years, 3 months or thereabouts, and so therefore the searches have to be updated within the life of the very original publication. This is not updating an already published Cochrane review. This is running an update search just before the review is published. So those were the 10 things that I wanted to draw your attention to about the Cochrane Library, but I just wanted to close by saying that there is always help available from the Cochrane Library help files and help pages. From the Cochrane Library homepage, you can select help and then how to use the Cochrane Library. And there you'll find links to a search guide, information on the search function and the search page. You'll find a newly updated Cochrane Library reference guide, which was launched in October of this year. And you'll find virtual webinars and live online workshops. The online self-paced tutorials, there are 3 of those: an introduction to the Cochrane Library, browsing and searching the Cochrane Library, and using Mesh and the Search Manager, and also database help. There's some information about Central, the Cochrane Central Register of Controlled Trials, and the Cochrane Methodology Register to help people better understand what those 2 databases are. And again, here you have the URLs on your slides. So in summary, the 10 things you may not have known about the Cochrane Library, you do now, but what you may not have known is that the Cochrane Library does not consist solely of systematic reviews of the effectiveness of interventions. The Cochrane reviews are not based only on trial results published in journals. The Cochrane database of systematic reviews does have an impact factor. Cochrane is working towards open access to all new and updated Cochrane reviews by 2020. There is an iPad edition of the Cochrane Library. There are podcast versions for a number of Cochrane reviews. Cochrane does have a point of care tool called Cochrane Clinical Answers. You can follow the Cochrane Library on social media and using RSS feeds. Cochrane produces journal club packages based on Cochrane reviews, and there are now rules or standards for the conduct and reporting of Cochrane reviews in addition to the Cochrane handbook. And there is always help available from the Cochrane Library help files and help pages. So I'm now going to pass back to Desiree, who is going to moderate the questions and comments. And thank you all for your attention thus far.
Well, thank you, Carol. Thank you so much for that very interesting presentation of yours. I have seen we have more than 10 questions. I think by now we have up to 15, up to 20. So I'm just going to start at the very top, reading them out to you, and hope that we have enough time to go through all the questions, if that's okay for you.
Thank you.
Well, so the first question by Lindsay Snell is, she would like to know, how are topics selected for overviews? For example, does it happen when there is a certain number of reviews published for a topic?
That's a very good question, and of course there would have to be a certain number of reviews published to make it worthwhile creating an overview. But my understanding is that the decision is taken predominantly within the specific clinical review group. If the specific clinical review group, of which there are about 50 worldwide, take for example the breast cancer group in Australia, if they felt that they had enough similar reviews, that is to say related reviews within their suite of reviews within their review group, they would then decide to try to create an overview.
Okay, thank you very much. The second question is from Geraldine de Champ. Can you retrieve the refs of these Cochrane editorials also via databases like Medline or Embase?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, please, Desiree? And it's not coming up on my screen.
Okay, it's can you retrieve the refs of these Cochrane editorials also via database like Medline or Embase?
The refs, are you saying?
Yes.
Right. Is the question, are the Cochrane editorials indexed in Medline? Perhaps the person answering the question could respond to you by chat. Is the question, are the references to the editorials indexed in Medline? And perhaps while they're doing that, could you move to the next question, Desiree?
Okay, right. So the next question is, do you use things like AllTrialsNet when looking at unpublished research?
Yes, indeed we do, and that again is included in the training that we offer when we offer our training on clinical trials searching.
Right, and it's just another question from Sarah Bruch. Also, if you're using unpublished research, is Cochrane looking at trying to ensure more research is published?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Well, shall I read it out again, or is it just how it is?
I don't know. Do you understand the question that you're reading out? Does it make sense to you? Could you try reading it again?
If you're using unpublished research, is Cochrane looking at trying to ensure more research is published?
Right, sorry, that does make sense. Yes, absolutely. Cochrane is signed up to the All Trials campaign. I forget the exact logo of All Trials, but it's something like All Trials. All trials published, all trials reported, or something like that. And ever since the beginning of Cochrane, we've been fighting very heavily for the results of studies to be made public.
Okay, thank you very much. Anne Madden would like to know, tying in with Andrew's session, will Cochrane be producing rapid reviews, etc.?
We've been looking at rapid reviews for some years now, and we now have a rapid reviews methods group within Cochrane. Within Cochrane, there are probably about 15 or so different methods groups that look at different aspects. For example, the information retrieval methods group that I've already mentioned, but some of them look at different types of reviews, so or different types of evidence, like the qualitative one with which Andrew Booth is involved. And as I say, we have recently agreed the setting up of a rapid reviews methods group, and they will be looking at how Cochrane proceeds with regard to rapid reviews. But I should also say that it's not exactly the answer to the question, but it's related. In addition to Cochrane undertaking rapid reviews as part of its own suite of reviews, we now have a facility within Cochrane called Cochrane Response, which is Cochrane acting almost like a health technology assessment agency, where we take on commissioned reviews. And many of these will, of course, be very much more, in inverted commas, rapid than a standard Cochrane review.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, a question by Sarah Bruch. Will you be having an Android app or a non-iTunes podcast version in the near future?
That's a good question, and I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that. The question again came up in Australia, and we did check, and there was nothing mentioned that we could find about Android, but that's a very good question. I'm afraid I don't know the answer.
Okay, great, thanks. David Chambers would like to know, how regularly is Cochrane Clinical Answers updated?
It depends exactly how you interpret the question. The new evidence syntheses are published regularly within Cochrane Clinical Answers. I can't tell you how regularly that is. I don't know if it's on a publish when ready basis like the Cochrane Library. If it is on a publish when ready basis, it would be daily like the Cochrane Library. But of course, each particular evidence synthesis in and of itself is clearly not updated daily. So it depends exactly what the nature of the question was.
Okay. Jacqueline Limpens would like to know, is a Cochrane overview the same as an umbrella review?
Yes, thank you, Jacqueline, for the question. They're called overviews, they're called reviews of reviews, they're called also umbrella reviews. So thank you for the question and for the opportunity to clarify.
Tulevi Ovaska asks, is searching Scopus enough to say you have searched Embase included in Scopus?
Let me just cast my mind back. My recollection is that within Scopus, you don't have the facility to explode Emtree terms, and there's also another feature of Emtree which escapes me just at the moment. Which means that the searching of Scopus is not as sophisticated as the searching of Embase. So no, although the majority of the content of Embase is included within Scopus, the actual search functionality within Scopus is the problem.
Okay. Lindsay Snell asks, out of curiosity, roughly how much content is there in Central which isn't in Medline or Embase?
I can't remember off the top of my head. We have a figure within the Cochrane Handbook that will give you that number, Lindsay, in Chapter 6. Central is compiled from records from Medline, records from Embase, and of course Embase now contains the Medline records, which confuses the issue, records from hand searching journals and conference abstracts, conference proceedings, and also from searching a number of other sources. So I'm afraid I don't recollect the figure, but if you look at Chapter 6 of the handbook, you'll see that there is a figure there.
The next question is it recommended or mandatory to check included studies on being cited to, for example, via Web of Science?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, please, Desiree?
Is it recommended or mandatory to check included studies on being cited to, for example, via Web of Science?
Did you say on being cited to?
Yes, that's what it says here.
Right, okay. I'll just go back to the slide, the mandatory slide for references. If you'll just bear with me, I'll just look at the
slide 48.
Thank you. That's very helpful of the questioner. I did mean to ask the participants to do that, and I forgot. So thank you to the questioner who slide 48.
Yes.
Sorry, which number?
Well, it's just saying the question popped out at slide 48. So that is when we, 48, that's when we got the question.
Okay, I'll go to slide 48, but I don't think that's the right question. Okay. I don't think that's the right slide. Let me try and find the slide without the number.
I think the question is about citation tracking. Is it recommended or mandatory to check to do citation tracking on the included studies?
Oh, is it mandatory to do citation tracking rather than checking the reference lists? Is that the question? Could the person who's asked that question please respond in the chat to say that she's asking about citation tracking rather than checking reference lists?
Yes, back and also forward citation tracking, back and forward.
Thank you very much, Marshall. No, I'm just referring back to the standards within Cochrane where it is mandatory to check the reference lists in the included studies. So that is, if you like, level 1 reference checking, as it's often called, but it is not mandatory to do citation tracking into further generations, as Marshall has explained. But of course, these things are definitely recommended. There is a great deal of activity which is recommended and certainly good practice, but it is not absolutely mandatory. So please don't understand the fact that something isn't listed as a mandatory standard. Please don't understand that as meaning that we wouldn't be advocating it. And you'll see in the next draft of the Cochrane Handbook, which is in preparation, as I've already mentioned, we go into a lot more detail about citation searching. Sorry, we go into a lot more detail than we do in the current published version, I should specify. So thank you, that's a very important question.
The next question is, talking about quality, will peer review of searches be applied to non-DTAR reviews in the near future?
Sorry, will peer review be?
Non-DTAR.
That's diagnostic test accuracy reviews.
Thank you.
I think it's TAR, technology assessment reports, but it's the actual question, the sort of subjects and verbs and nouns and things. Could you repeat the question, Desiree, slowly?
Talking about quality, will peer review of searches be applied to non-DTAR reviews in the near future?
Will it be applied to? Is that what you're saying?
Be applied to, yes.
Will it be applied to? Again, we have no Cochrane standards with respect to peer review of search strategies. The Information Retrieval Methods Group did ask for some standards around peer review, but that was not accepted by Cochrane editorial unit as a whole. But again, within the Cochrane Handbook, we now have a new section on peer review, which strongly advocates the use of peer review for all search strategies relating to Cochrane. And again, interest declared as a co-author, but we recommend there that people use the recently published JCE paper, Journal of Clinical Epidemiology, that people use the recently updated PRESS checklist. And I think that this point is generic to all electronic search strategies, irrespective of what type of evidence synthesis, and indeed beyond evidence synthesis. The PRESS checklist can be used, and I would recommend should be used for peer review, that is by your peers, and self-review of all electronic searches to ensure high quality.
Well, thank you very much. I think we're quite good in time. There are just a few questions left. Another one is the one-page summary of reviews. How is the progress on this?
The one-page summary of reviews. There are a number of different summaries of Cochrane reviews. We have the abstract, and we also have the plain language summary, the PLS. And as far as I'm aware, all of the new Cochrane reviews are published with the plain language summary.
And the second last question is, any plans to do more non-clinical reviews? For example, skills, CPD interventions for health staff?
Yes, I think Cochrane has a long history of reviews of, within the non-clinical field in that sense. We have the EPOC group, which was one of the very earliest groups in Cochrane, founded in Scotland and then transferred over to Canada with Jeremy Grimshaw, and now back in the UK in Oxford. And they for many years have looked at professional organizational change. So I think that if you look up EPOC, EPOC, Effective Professional and Organisational Change, as a review group within Cochrane, you'll find many of the Cochrane reviews that that you're interested in.
Thank you very much. The last question is quite a tricky one. It's several sentences, so I have got to somehow summarize it, because, or shall I just read the whole thing out to you? Because it's quite complicated, I think.
Okay.
Okay, well, I just read the whole thing out. Enough detail only to be reported. The searches must be reported, yes, but is there a requirement to report them in a way that someone else could just repeat them, just to copy the queries? Sometimes we see reviews where search terms are mentioned, but combinations of them might not be.
Right, thank you. I think I do understand the question. Yes, the requirement is that the searches are reported such that they can be re-executed, and you'll find within the standards much more. I only gave the headlines for each of these standards, but you'll see that within the text of the standard, it specifies that, and this way predates the standards, this has always been Cochrane policy since time immemorial, that the full electronic search strategy for each database, for each review, must be copied and pasted and included in full within the review. So there's no issue around how the terms are combined. The actual sort of image, if you like, almost copy and pasted, so not retyped. Retyping is a hanging offence in Cochrane. It must be copied and pasted as executed, and for each database these must be included in the review. These are now included in the appendix section of the review, so if you go to the appendix section of any Cochrane review, you will find the full search strategies as executed, line by line, with the overall number of records at the end of each strategy.
Okay, thank you very much. I just got a note from Marshall, who said we should go back to one of the questions. Marshall, I don't really know which question you mean. One question I think was not yet answered, but I wouldn't see which one this is.
That's correct. There was a question where I asked somebody to respond in the chat. I'm not seeing the chat from everyone. I'm seeing only chat from moderators, but I asked somebody to respond in the chat to clarify the nature of their question.
Right, I don't have, anything on the list to, repose or re-ask the question. So I think the question, the person did not respond, because I just have a list of questions in front of me.
Okay.
The question, if I may barge in, was asked by Herdine, and Herdine did reply. The question was about whether the Cochrane editorials are indexed in Medline or Embase.
Thank you very much. My understanding is that the Cochrane editorials are indexed in Medline. And thank you, Herdine, for clarifying your point.
If I may, we missed one question as well from Jacqueline Limpens. Will it become easier for researchers to exclude conferences and other grey literature if patrons do not wish to include these?
I understand the question from an audio point of view and from an English language point of view, but I'm not quite sure what Jacqueline is getting at. In what sense and as a result of what is Jacqueline asking, will it become easier for people to exclude this material? Could you quickly type something in, Jacqueline? Would you mind?
Well, it does not seem like that, as if she were to respond. We don't see anything right now in the chat.
No, I'm just opening chat from everyone and I don't see a response from Jacqueline. No, I see something from Jacqueline at 11 o'clock saying I do see some editorials in PubMed, but that doesn't answer my question.
Okay, right. So if she's not going to, answer, shall we just leave it with that question then? Or do we give her some time to respond?
Jacqueline has responded saying, sorry, it is not easy to explain this by chat. Okay, I think that probably sums it up, Jacqueline, which is why I didn't understand quite how I was to approach the question. So thank you for agreeing with me, and possibly we should leave that for a chat over coffee next time we meet.
Well, if there are no other questions, I think we are going to close the session for today. I would like once again to say thank you so much for your time and your inputs, and that you have been here with us today. Thank you so much, Carol.
Well, thank you, Desiree, and I'd like to close by thanking you and all of your colleagues on this pilot programme for having the initiative to work together on this, and thank you to EAHIL for funding this pilot programme, and I very much hope that it will be successful and it will be something that EAHIL members can benefit from as we go on.